Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're excited to have you for today's Counselor Summer Series session via Polaris Athlete Hub. As college athletics continues to evolve, helping student athletes navigate college admissions, recruiting, and NIL landscape has become more complex than ever. School counselors play a critical role in guiding students and families through these decisions with confidence, clarity, and a focus on long-term success. Today's session is designed to provide practical insights you can take back to your schools immediately. And before we begin, a quick housekeeping note as well. Today's session is being recorded. We'll send the recording to everyone who registered via email, and it will also be available on Polaris Athlete's YouTube channel afterwards. So you'll be able to revisit and share the discussion with colleagues who couldn't join us live today. We're super excited to welcome Ian Harkness, Director of College Counseling at Malvern Prep. And Ian will be leading today's discussion on college counseling in the NIL era, sharing his perspective and real-world strategies for supporting student athletes throughout the college planning and recruiting process. So thank you all today for joining us. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ian now.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for the invitation to join today. And thanks for everybody for joining on a Friday in the summer, which is, an awesome time for school counselors, college counselors, not only to enjoy some time with themselves, their family, but also to do some important learning as well. And, I'm excited to dive into this topic. It's one for me that has been, a couple years, just general interest in trying to find some really good information, really to support the students I work with every day. And so here's a quick glimpse into what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to run through kind of an high level overview from my lens as a college counselor, kind of give you a quick NIL primer from, that important perspective, talk a little bit about trusted sources and where to find good information as a counselor, talk a bit about our role, how our toolkit has expanded, even if we don't like that. If we're working with athletes, I think it's definitely changed, and being prepared for those conversations that are coming to help our students think about the future. Hopefully that doesn't include a transfer portal, but if we do have a student who's working, doing a quick high level intro into that space, talking about signing days, how much they've changed, and last but not least, most importantly, perhaps their mental health through all of this. A little bit about me. So why am I here? I'm certainly not an NIL expert. I'm someone who has worked very closely in the NIL space from the lens of college admission. So I attended Gettysburg College. It's my alma mater. I'm a proud alum. Graduated and spent a little bit of time at Elmira College. My first 2 years was as an admission counselor recruiting students. And, I learned really quickly in a small college environment that, enrollment is so much driven by the success of athletics, the success of those coaches, their recruitment habits, their planning. It was an incredible experience to learn the basics of enrollment. How does a school find that delta each year? I lived and learned I was a graduate assistant, so my roommates were coaches of basketball, lacrosse, good buddies over the years, and have, learned this process through their recruitment strategies and watching and learning, as they were going out after each class. I then returned to Gettysburg for almost 10 years working in the admission office there. So recruiting students, helping to run communication, certainly working with athletes all along the way. Both of those Division III experiences were incredibly helpful to see, that student athlete model. My current role for the last 11 years is at Malvern Prep, so a suburban Philadelphia prep school. We're Augustinian, so we're very much associated with Villanova, kind of a little brother down the street. The original prep school founded at Villanova, and very proud of that connection. We are a place where traditionally about 1/3 to 40% of our students are continuing on to play a sport. I've learned a lot in 11 years about supporting students to the Division I level, those top 2% kind of guys. We are all boys, so when I talk about it, I tend to say all the guys, but I do mean student athletes if I slip into that in this conversation. But our students are really going in a lot of different directions. They're looking at Division III, Division I, Division II, a little junior college, some club sports. And having those conversations is something we deal with frequently. We're in a space where this tradition has been pretty prominent for the last many years. So our athletic program, our coaches are very much in that conversation with us. And I feel incredibly supported. Really, I think there's an open and honest conversation, which is a healthy way, hopefully the same in your schools as well. But all this experience now, leads me to kind of where we are today. Before we do that, this is my family, what keeps me motivated each day, my wife and my 2 kids. Currently, they are at this lake in northern Pennsylvania, kind of the Southern Finger Lakes. While I'm here doing a little work and, catching up, hoping to join them later this weekend. But really important to me is that I grew up in that space, that, northern part of Pennsylvania where nobody really goes, right? It's pretty rural, pretty remote. I made it to where I landed really because of my mother, who kept pushing, to kind of get out of that mold, to break free from a space where probably only about 35 to 40% of our students, my classmates, attended a 4-year institution. Where that took me is really, to Gettysburg, and throughout my professional career, I've been very involved in helping to, speak directly to that point. Both in Harrisburg, our state capital in Pennsylvania, and in DC. So these photos, is really that paying it back from my lens, trying to make sure that good information about those rural students in Pennsylvania made it to the legislators in DC and in Harrisburg. They needed to know why rural students needed some support as well. So my roles in PACAC focus specifically on advocacy, helping support government relations, and allowed me to really move through that association, and opportunities kept presenting themselves. I led as president for a few years, had the opportunity to then return as the dean of the Summer Institute. So not only thinking about association from leadership level, but helping to train counselors to help welcome the next generation. So it's Pennsylvania's version of a rookie camp for admission counselors and college counselors. One of my fun achievements in the last many years, and one of my outside of work, most popular things to do is to climb, to hike, to get out and explore, be out in nature. This picture on the right is the top of Kitstey Pike in England. So my buddy and I hiked across England from the Irish Sea to the North Sea. It was a long time coming, but really one of those athletic adventures that I just absolutely love, and gave me a lot of time to think about it. And so this is shifting back into where we are in the focus for today. The time on the trail gives you a lot of time to think, right? Days after day. The trip in England was probably about 12, 13 days on the trail. This picture here is not me. It is a Sherpa in the Himalayas, right? If you're not familiar, the Sherpas are hired typically for those big climbs like Everest, right? K2, some of the other big Himalayan trips. What a Sherpa does is provide space for a climber to do the climbing, knowing that Sherpas have gone ahead, right? They've laid the path. They've provided a ladder to get from one side to the other of a crevasse, or they've established the ropes that you'll need to hook on and secure your pathway. I love this. I use this photo quite a bit in our classes at school when I talk about our role as counselors, mostly because I feel this in a lot of different ways, right? Each of the pieces in this guy's space, on his back, on his feet, the strap that goes across his head plays a really important role, right? To spread that weight around, or to carry all of those pieces, that baggage. As counselors, we do that as well, right? We know a lot of those pieces. That could be financial aid, that could be supporting first generation students, that could be thinking about a real complex family situation in a student's college list. I would argue that NIL needs to be one of those pieces in this as well, right? So as we're helping students navigate this process, here's the top of Everest, right? This is the path you might take to get there, right? Students are on this path now. We know what those pieces would look like along the way. We know how to help support financial aid. What does it look like when they're already ahead, or when they're getting information that's not coming through a source that we trust, right? I think this trek looks different for every student we support. If they're looking at Division I, if they're the top 2% and they're seeing a lot of interest, awesome. But 98% will probably have a slightly different conversation, right? And being able to support their path all equally as important. It's also important to know that this isn't a future conversation, and to link it to hiking. Many of our families have already started this conversation as we think about NIL, the decisions that are being made about recruiting. Right now, they're happening many times without a trusted, neutral voice in the room. I think that's our role as counselors. It always has been, and these conversations are certainly happening as we speak. When I think about NIL, we all, kind of know what a name is, right? My name is Ian, right? Jeff, he's here as well. We know what our face looks like. You see it on the screen, right? Our image. You can see yours as well if your camera's on. The likeness is often the hardest piece. As a child, I love to play video games, and this is one of those that keeps coming back as a reflection of what that might be, right? Name, image, a likeness of a basketball player on an EA Sports game. Many of you might think back to other games throughout the years. Jeff and I called this out at a conference just a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks now. People picked up exactly on who this was, right? It's Blake Griffin. And, through NIL and I'm going to run through a history in just a few minutes, but like before, I would always wonder, like, how do my favorite players' names end up here, right? Or, are they paid for that, right? What does that look like in terms of compensation? Shifting gears, as a counselor, I was looking for good NIL information, right? As things changed 5, 6, 7 years ago, NIL and being able to earn, something for those rights, if you were one of those college football players or others that, showed up in the game or had other opportunities through NIL present itself. I just wanted to find some good sources. These were 10 of the most popular. They're the ones that happen to show up on LinkedIn through Google searches all the time, right? They're some of the most prominent sources that you might find. What I struggled with is actually finding sources that could talk specifically to the work that we do, and who weren't just talking about the big headlines. The 2%, the big $1 million deal, right? The big names in NIL that we all know. The other thing that I discerned is that there's a very big difference between high school NIL and college NIL. I've been thinking a lot about this since Dr. Scott Grant's presentation, even just a couple of weeks ago for Polaris. And if you haven't seen it, it's really, really good stuff. Go out to the YouTube channel to see it. I've gone back, as he promised, to watch it multiple times because I find something new each time. And one of those, as I'm thinking about where do you go for good sources on high school NIL, is that a lot of those sources that I just showed focus on college NIL. They're not thinking about a high school athlete. When reality is students who are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade might already have this on their radar. If they don't, their parents might, right? By the time they get to us, who knows what they're thinking, what they've done, who they're working with, right? College NIL, I'm a little less concerned. I feel like colleges are kind of getting to the game a little bit, some a little faster than others, but I'm interested in being able to support our students before they even get there, right? To make sure that they understand what that name, image, likeness opportunity is now, not to make money necessarily, but to understand what that future could lead to. And just so we're clear, here's Dr. Scott Grant's, map from just another week ago with that, pause and that reminder to be careful. It's possible for most students across the country to receive NIL in high school, right? So high school state associations are the regulator of that currently, right? So here's just a glimpse into where you might be in the state or in the country, which state, our state, Pennsylvania, students can earn that NIL deal in many ways. Which we'll talk about in a second here. Just a quick history lesson. I was a history major, so I feel like it's important to continue to return to why and how we get to where we are today. It's only June 2021 when Alston versus NCAA came through Supreme Court. It changed the game. It really eliminated what we knew before that, right? So the go to college, play for 4 seasons. The benefit was your experience as a college athlete, and the scholarship to play is no longer the way, right? This changed the game completely, paved the way for NIL. It changed the rules around amateurism. and the NCAA lost that protection. It also kind of clarified space that students aren't necessarily earning a paycheck for their performance, right? It's not about performance on the field. It simply, defined that they could, like Griffin, earn cash for EA Sports promos, right? In 25, it changed again, right? This is much more the current landscape, even though as I'm looking at this slide, two of the big pieces have changed even most recently in July, right? So the revenue share piece goes up every single year. That's more of a floor, that 20 million, and it's gone up each year since. Will continue for the next 10. Roster limits, those have gone into place for Division I schools who have opted into revenue share, right? NIL regulations, and who's looking at what NIL deals are, came out of this House versus NCAA settlement that created the College Sports Commission, right? Which has most recently put out a lot of data. They're not concerned about those $600 deals, but they want them reported, right? They're reviewing ones that are much more significant. I believe the number is 25,000 or above, right? So, this has also changed and will continue to change. I'm sharing it in some way because I feel like as counselors, we need to just kind of know the basics. What's going on? What does that landscape look like? You might not have to know the details of all these pieces, but if you knew the landscape prior to COVID, prior to 25, here we are, right? A brand new world. The reality is it's created two very different systems, an NIL world and a revenue sharing world, right? NIL, your name, image, and likeness, is earned through brand activity, right? It's not something you're signing on NIL or on signing day, right? It's something that you're working out specifically with a third-party brand. It's compensation for your time. It requires time and effort on your part as an athlete. It's market-based, right? It's whatever the market would pay for that experience and for your time. Rev share is very different. That is something that you might sign if you're signing that financial aid agreement on a signing day, right? I feel like it's something up front from the university that they're going to talk about. It comes from the Department of Revenue, and only for those who are participating and who've opted in. Right. There are a few schools and a few conferences who did not. So a few schools in conferences who a majority of their conferences in and they're not. Right. The Ivy and the Patriot being the two in Division I that clearly as a whole opted out. And it's important to know that these two are very different pieces of the puzzle, and you might deal with students who are, the top 2% who are, very much competitive for both of these pieces. But you might be working with a Division III athlete who's just as excited and has a really unique story, who might really benefit from NIL and understanding kind of what that might look like for them. Some of those activities, here you go. Again, I feel like it's much more that overview of pieces that they could participate in, right? Merchandise sales, autographs, boy, if they're really good, that could be neat. But perhaps it's more the camps or instruction or just showing up in an appearance, small town team, big athletic reputation, bringing that athlete out for just to show up at a pizza party or something might be the piece that gets, others to come and purchase. Again, one of the most popular is really just social media promotions, clearly leading the way. But these are some of the things that students might be asked to do in high school or in college in an NIL space. Again, reinforcing the headlines, like you're not seeing a lot of that stuff, right? This is just a quick glimpse into what you might find. It's all of those pieces that, I don't know, we do expect to find big money, big million, NIL at the 2% level. But do you actually know? And what I love in my journey, I found that there are a couple of places to turn for more realistic 98% type information. One of those, and in my last year in my searching for good high school and college NIL information, I found Bill Carter. So Bill is currently, a professor and teaching NIL, one of the co-founders of Polaris. And, really what I found most important was initially his NIL MBA, and that information is certainly, helpful to understand the ecosystem that is NIL and where you might plug in. As a counselor, it gave me some really important pieces, and here is one of them, right? So data to take back to talk about this, with my students and families as it comes up, right? The average earnings is far more in line with what you might expect, right? Not seeing on the news the millions, but the used on the Civic. Per deal values, pretty average, right? And over time, over their the total athlete earnings, could add up over time. But per deal, that median $60, they're more likely to typically see something that might pay for, a book, something to help support their education rather than help support their family for the next generation. Also not in the news, and I'm curious, Jeff, your thoughts about this one, but what just dropped yesterday for Bill's NIL Forum and the research that they're doing. If you're interested in how NIL shows up in recruiting, that was the focus of yesterday. The takeaway for me really was that 33% of prospects, so thinking about college or making that commitment to a college, only 33% can correctly distinguish between rev share and third-party NIL. So that screen I just shared a few minutes ago, only about a third can actually distinguish that. 26% think they're the same thing, right? And 36% say no one, not a coach, a parent, or an advisor, has ever explained the difference, and that their top teacher was the internet at 48%. Right, making the case much more that we need as counselors to be able to speak this language, to be able to understand, keep up with, and reinforce the fact. I know, Jeff, what are your thoughts about that too? And as you were reading through, it just screams the fact that we need to be in this space.
It does, Ian. And to that point as well, Bill's data also it truly reinforces the importance of our role as counselors who are looking at each of these potential collegiate student athletes as the total person here, and meeting them in that moment of transition and question and confusion, providing them with that sense of clarity, those data-driven conversations from our seat, thinking long-term, big picture. I really feel like that's where our value is. That's our value add as counselors. It's always been our value add because we're able to kind of eliminate all that noise for families and help them find their best fit in doing so. This data that Bill, has brought to the surface, whether it's the recruitment process or the transfer portal or the facts and figures as it relates to the realities of NIL earnings, it's important for families to have that information in hand earlier in the process, even before they hit high school, just so then foundationally they start building themselves in a way that is connected with reality, because there's just so much misinformation out there, and there's so much hype and excitement in that chapter of their journey as well, that they might be hearing a different message from their club sports program or their potential suitors as it relates to the recruitment process and things of that nature. So I think back on a student athlete that we've been helping this past semester. He was waiting for the transfer portal to open up for track and field, and as we know, that's late. That's after high school graduation. So he's waiting for those Big Ten and ACC offers based upon the transfer portal and what those institutions were prioritizing through the portal first, and then wherever he could find his fit thereafter. In doing so, he received multiple scholarship offers at institutions that he was targeting, but none of them were, a full scholarship offer. So now the relationship is a non-revenue generating athlete without a full scholarship offer in the 11th hour. Okay, how can we now redirect this family in a way where they can close that gap? And that's through that third party brand generated partnership, NIL, that is authentic and in alignment with his interests, strengths, and values. So the thought here is, okay, we're looking at $10,000 to $12,000 worth of a gap that we need to close through third party NIL, and let's leverage this this economic opportunity that's presenting itself in college sports to close that gap for the family financially at this point. But
awesome. I don't know. I think as we bring it back to like where if you've got some really good sources that are speaking this language, please share them in the chat. I would love to know. Share through email. I just want to, but most importantly, I feel like what I found with, the connection to Bill and to celebrate, our, alma mater, it is a connection to Gettysburg. We're both loyal Gettysburg alums, but then, reaching out to Bill, thanking him for doing this work and just sharing it freely with us. Like, I feel like what was nice, he connected me to Jeff. Jeff, then Polaris, here we are, having these conversations, really bringing a lot of that information out to counselors. That was my point, right? So that 33% can correctly distinguish between rev share, only 48%. So that the top teacher was their internet, right? So I flew through that one. Here's another one that just happened last week, or just last month. D1 eligibility changed, and if you're working with students who are thinking about D1, who've opted in the schools who've opted into the revenue sharing piece, 5 and 5 eligibility. So what does that mean, right? So if a student has opted in, they're looking Division 1, or the school has opted in, the student athlete would have up to 5 years of eligibility when they enroll. And that eligibility clock starts the academic year after their 19th birthday, right? A good friend asked a question, what about, a November 19th birthday? That student would finish that academic year, and then their eligibility clock would start that next September, right? So it's really much more about birthday. It eliminates red shirts. So this new program, or this new eligibility rule, eliminates important medical red shirts, entrance red shirts. So if you've worked with students who have started and had an extra year to get a little bigger, faster, stronger, no longer, right? If you're working with students who are PGs, those birth dates, other things, I have some thoughts and friends have shared about junior hockey. What is that in terms of date, birth date, and when you might be eligible? But this is now becoming, assuming lawsuits don't change this, the law of the land. So this next recruiting class will have 5 years of eligibility to complete in 5 years, right? That changes the game in a lot of different ways, right? I'm not sure I know exactly what that means yet, but brings us back to the question of, needing to be here and having this conversation. I think certainly for a high school athlete looking at college, the recruitment game has changed in a lot of other ways previously, but this makes it slightly harder potentially if there are a few more current athletes who are going to stick around for that additional year. Does that make it a little tougher to get that spot on that roster in Division 1? Does this in some way change the conversation that we're having, right? What's really interesting is that Bill's data would also suggest that 60% of high school prospects don't understand this new age-based eligibility, right? Another recent poll that has, and pretty big implications for the work that we do with students and families. I want to just also stop and just take a moment to say that NIL isn't necessarily the goal, right? It's really about education. And if data can help us inform our families better, inform our practice better, that's what this is about, right? It's about giving them the tools and the knowledge to then continue on and to take that and apply what they've learned to each next step as they grow. That would be the same for an athlete. That would be the same for a musician. That would be the same for anybody coming through our offices as counselors. They all also have opportunities to earn NIL, right? And that's where, we could name plenty of examples, and perhaps a famous manager from March Madness a few years ago that had an awesome NIL deal, and a lot of different thoughts there. But a college counselor's role is the same, right? We really have not changed. Maybe the core difference is that we have to be able to lean into NIL in some way, right? It's all about academic fit. It's making sure that the student has thought about that. It's making sure that as they're making athletic decisions, the social life, the space around, the city versus not in the city, or finances are part of that conversation, right? We are the ones, the trusted voices that think about those things in nearly every conversation when we're helping a student navigate this post-secondary conversation. It's also one of those very common things that if you're thinking about the changes in recruitment, what is that opportunity going to look like for D1 versus D2 versus D3? Maybe it's junior college, maybe it's club, maybe it's NAIA, but we're the ones that are there also helping to think about fit through that athletic lens. One common example that I see often is a student who has some opportunities to play Division I, or to some Division I looks, but really has a more high potential to make an impact year one in a Division II or Division III school. And they're weighing those options. Where do I go? What am I thinking? What Bill's most recent data also points to is that those decisions are being made not with NIL in mind, but being made by the traditional factors. Where can I play? Where am I going to see the best opportunity to do the work I want to do in the classroom? A coach or a team I might align with, whatever that might be. So our role, again, still continues maybe to be at a higher level, helping them see those other things. Where do I fit best? This is not to educate based on, many of you know this already, right? But to give you an idea where students are choosing, how many schools are in each of those spaces, Division I, Division II, Division III. What is their time? What does that output look like for practice at Division I level? We know that's much more of a time commitment than at potentially Division II, Division III. The roster limit changes have also impacted recruitment. So given just a few of those updates here, and some might look at this and say, Ian, yeah, but the scholarship limit before was 85 in football. Now it's 105. Yes, but that's now a cap. That's a max. In previous, before this rule, before House v. NCAA in 25, they might have more than that 105. Walk-ons, red shirts, other scenarios where that roster might be bigger, right? That's where maybe your high school athlete got the look to walk on. I know we surely had a bunch in those football, basketball opportunities where students took an opportunity that they might not get in today's world, right? Because of that cap, because of that limit. Now for those schools who have opted in, that is their scholarship number, that is their salary cap, for lack of better words, right? And some of the changes reflected in that. It might pinch and has pinched certain sports or certain athletes' opportunities as bigger, faster, stronger students are in the portal, right? For NAIA, for National Junior College, here's just another brief glimpse, but there's a bunch of students nationally thinking about competition, not just at NCAA Division I. I know I'm preaching this to the crowd, but we tend to see in the headlines and the news only that big NIL something, but it applies to NAIA, junior college, and certainly club sports as well, right? We've had many students who've gone onto this space. It's emerging sports. NCAA has had a variety of new opportunities emerge in the last few years. Worked with a dozen students or more who are thinking about motor sports. That's not necessarily NCAA, but like one of those interesting pieces that combines marketing, technical something, understanding of a business, how that might overplay or overlap with sport. Esports, another one. If you have students who are thinking about competition at the next level, NIL is really for everyone. All those levels, club sports, intramural, and non-athletes alike. It's pushing us further along the line of saying we can use these tools in a variety of different conversations with students. NIL is not about NIL. I think really, if we view it through the lens of long-term leadership development, student development, understanding what our role is, not only in college counseling as a counselor, but as a school. So helping to inform the athletic department, perhaps head of school, assistant head of school, whoever you might report to, what is the role of the school, right? And pretty much we can't be a part of these, right? We have to be able to support the student, but not developing an NIL plan for them, right? That's not what we're there for. It's really about helping students, in my lens, see the educational possibilities that are presented through this opportunity. And really, if we think about that, in our curriculum, we're often having students think about who they are, right? They're reflecting on and talking deeply, and even if it's for an essay or for perhaps, I don't know, just their resume, what do they care about? What are they good at? Where have they led? Right? It's about helping them build confidence in themselves, telling their story, whether that's to a coach, through their common application, wherever that might be. We see that growth 6 through 12. We can help them talk about values, decision-making, and perhaps in an NIL world, it's much more just about pointing out that, hey, when I look at your public profile on Instagram, it's only sport. But I know you've done a lot of work and your values align with service, and you've done a ton of impact work in your community, right? Can that show up there too, right? Pointing them in the right direction. It's stuff we've always done. I think maybe where, personal branding and telling your story, I don't know, feels awkward to me is really when I think about, why that is. Like personal branding, in many ways, is how the state or the athletic associations have approved NIL, right? Personal branding is written into the legislation or into, the guidelines for how a state or how a student or institutions might help support students in this space. It's stuff we do all the time, right? The difference is really audience, right? If you're branding for a company, your audience is to sell something, right? In this space, we're helping students brand themselves, thinking about college admission, who might see their strengths, who might see where they're strongest, that might not be apparent to them. It's also important to think about, students want internships and experiences in colleges. I think this is an area where colleges have really upped their game in the last decade, right? Students want internships, but there's not a huge amount, right? What's nice is that NIL provides that space for students to be able to use their skill set, perhaps to partner with a business, an organization, someone in their community, a food bank. Maybe it's a short-term paid project. Maybe it's to do that for, I don't know, a free meal, or to promote that cause that they're really deeply passionate about, right? It's an opportunity for them to expand their resume in a micro internship in many ways, right? If you look at it through the lens of a counselor, as we always have, and providing, this lens for a student, I think that possibilities are really endless. The leadership data is pretty clear, right? We see this often. And I know if you've seen Jeff's presentation before, he speaks openly about this. Deloitte, Cornell partnered to say, hey, really obvious pieces, student athletes, specifically female student athletes, boy, a lot of success. And if NIL isn't the goal and education is, it aligns with our roles as counselors, right? It's not about me being there to support the NIL deal. It's much more about helping the student see, hey, you've got these skills, where someone else going to be able to invest in you, or in that something that makes you unique and then special. I want to just say a word about the transfer portal. I have a couple of these slides, but just to kind of give a counselor's perspective, transfer portal is hopefully something students are not aligning for, right? If we're talking about fit, to be honest, I've had some students talk openly about avoiding this, and I'm wanting to find a coach who would commit to them for 4 years. And we celebrated that, right? Because that's the true meaning of finding that right connection academically, athletically, socially, financially. the transfer portal exists. It's there for those students who choose to opt in to switch gears. I'm curious what others know about it, but typically this is it, right? It's a database for those student athletes to make that transfer, legal way to do it. It's the modern transfer marketplace, right? It gives both students a chance to see what other options might be out there, and coaches a chance to start to communicate through that system. I don't love it, right? But at the same time, it's a part of what we do. And really, the reality is, as we keep talking about it, and as I'm looking at the data, and Bill, again, the NL Forum, those students who enter the portal don't always leave. And if you think about this lens, and as I've talked about it with college colleagues who are in the admission world, Division I athletes are leaving at a lower rate than their peers sitting next to them in the classroom. So if we're thinking about this big picture long-term as counselors, as we often do, right, making a good match, even in a transfer world, we're not getting the full picture, right? Transfer portal doesn't always mean they leave, right? But if they're entering the transfer portal and they're not picked up, what does that mean for a counselor for supporting that student? It might mean different types of conversations long-term, right? I think it also pushes us back to the most important pieces, which are, fit. Signing days, right? Just in a few words, I just want to kind of offer this. I feel like it comes up in our conversations all the time. I'm lucky to be in a place where a lot of these happen within the athletic department, but I feel like we've done more and more and more of these over the years. To be clear, NIL is not NLI, the National Letter of Intent, which no longer exists. So if your school is still thinking about signing days as NLI moments, it's changed, right? It's time to think about them in a different way. I don't know that I have the specific example, and I think each school community is very different in the way that they approach these. For us, what has worked is, coaches leaning in to say, yes, for those big days when perhaps it's football or basketball, those, national days, there's a moment for that athlete to sign. Maybe that's their financial aid agreement. Maybe it's just that photo op. But they've also leaned into the fact of celebrating the student athlete commitment to continuing at the next level. It happens at a variety of different times for us, but it might be the entire lacrosse team in the spring, right? It might be the wrestling team when they're all ready to do that commitment at one point as well. It's certainly a highlight for our marketing program or marketing department on campus, but at the same time gives families, that celebration moment. It's not about what it used to be, which was signing that national letter of intent, right? It's become much more an opportunity to celebrate an achievement. I don't know. I feel like we could talk for hours about what that's been and where it is now. But if you are celebrating in that way, I love when I see schools, and I follow a bunch of schools that do these signing days for non-athletes as well, for musicians, for artists who are choosing some unique opportunities. I think that fits very much in the world of today in NIL. Perhaps my last but not least, most important slide. If we think about athletes who are making these decisions, they're opting in to a Division I commitment. Perhaps they're signing a financial aid agreement that includes rev share, and then seeing some NIL possibilities present themselves. Not only are they committing to a Division I program that's going to expect a lot of them, we know what academics will present as well, and how many hours they need to focus there. Now we're adding in an extra wrinkle of paid work, even if that's small. It still requires deliverables, right? And what happens when students now have an extra added piece in the mix, right? We've seen it happen, and I'm worried just to make sure that students are ready for that challenge, right? What supports exist? How can we help them see or point them in the right direction before they get to a place where perhaps it's their finances, right? That financial literacy, or I don't know, other parts of NIL that they might not think about, right? Taxes, showing up in their time and presenting, whatever it might be, and that impacting their social life as they're balancing everything on campus. What does that mean in terms of their mental health support we can provide that they may or may not have within their athletic program? It's about making sure students, before they get to that space, have had a time to understand the market, the landscape, the ecosystem that they're walking into. From my lens, I think that's very much what we do, right? We're counselors helping students make decisions about the future, right? That includes academics, that includes athletics for those who are fortunate enough to be, in those conversations with coaches. It's also finances, right? How can NIL perhaps for a student present some opportunities to afford that book or that flight or something else that they perhaps didn't have previously? I love having those conversations. I feel like certainly appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to present today. I don't feel like I'm an NIL expert. I feel like I love having the conversation about these things and how it applies to our work in college counseling, but certainly curious what questions you have, things I've missed, or as we continue the conversation into the future, please share those great sources and but open it up for questions if anybody has.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I really appreciate it. And I don't know, more so a statement rather than a question, but I've been seeing a lot of younger families, especially here in Texas, with the social media accounts that they're already building out for their child. And we're talking early, elementary school age, class of 2034, stuff like along those lines, right? They're building in preparation for this opportunity that they see coming down the pipeline for their son or daughter. And we as educators, being on this side of the desk, we know the long-term implications of taking steps like that when it comes to identity development and everything beyond just the scope of that social media account. From your seat at Malvern, as director of college counseling, how do you navigate those conversations with families when you might identify that there is somebody who's managing that child's account as early as 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and they're trying to build in preparation for all of this when it's such a teachable moment for the kid to be able to learn in real time and be able to navigate those waters in terms of everything? I'm just wondering, have you already started to see those patterns take shape in your community?
Not yet,
Okay.
but I do anticipate it, right? And I kind of worry or fret and think about those moments, right? When, when other people are really driving the bus, right? I feel like
Right.
what we're really good at in our program is starting with sophomores earlier, right? We've introduced that in the last few years, and it's a conversation directly with a kid. Right? Where are you? What are you thinking about, right? I still value those conversations and then enroll parents in as we go. Agents, others won't be a part of that, right? I know that we're often kind of helping them, I don't know, as counselors today, wherever they're getting information, we're helping them unlearn something before they relearn something else, right? Or at least to see the data that we might present to them about likelihood of admission. What's a reach school? What's a, likely option? We're constantly having to have those tough conversations and burst bubbles. And, I think this is just maybe perhaps another one of those long term where, even if you have 10,000 followers or, whatever that might be, it doesn't necessarily mean you're what that coach is looking for, right? Might give a different story to tell, but, I'm always, encouraging students to be the driver of this process. We're constantly fighting against, whether it's a parent or another, hired help to support an essay or, something else as well. So, I think counselors are prepared to keep pushing back in that space. I think as long as we're keeping it student-centered, we're helping them see that this work is worth it for them, that their long-term development is, equally as a part of this conversation, that we're centered in the right direction.
Right. And well, to your point, like on the other side of that coin as well, for those kids that may not identify as being an NIL eligible student athlete, right? Let's call it that. They don't have the social media accounts. They have no interest in social media, but they've been doing all of this authentic work that third-party brands and organizations would love to bring in and share that narrative and make that connection as part of their outreach and partnership. So flipping the script and also kind of pulling back the curtains there to inform those students and those families that this is attainable, this is accessible, and this is how you go about doing it while remaining aligned with your values. I feel like that's also
a good example maybe of what you're talking about there too. We were talking about it at school, and one of the things, programs we've built in the last few years that I really think is pretty incredible is opportunities for students to contribute, or alumni or friends of our school to come back and offer some insight, right? So a class, a micro course, right? We did a 3-part NIL micro course just this past year, and hope to do a revised version more in depth this coming year. But the students who signed up for it weren't just athletes looking to think about NIL. They were photographers who were already entrepreneurs in their own right, capturing photos on the sidelines, but maybe is interested in being a part of the spirit of the sports world, but not as the player, right? They could see opportunities to still contribute, to make, some potential money. We've had managers in that space as well who had done an incredible job, maybe running the drone, and that was picked up, right? Or their data analysis might be the right something for that, to earn a manager role, but perhaps with some of this, conversation as well. But it was fascinating to see who was in that room. And the level of engagement and questions practically derailed our plan for the day, right? They knew that we were trusted voices, and they wanted to take the conversation in a completely different way. I think that is also another reason why I get excited to, keep doing this work and bringing that information to the kids, because, they're interested in it. And, if we're not the ones providing that information, I'm kind of curious how, where they're going to get this, in the right way.
Raymond, would you like to go ahead with yours? I saw the question pop up in the chat statement. All right, we'll come back to you in case you'd like to. No, that's a very good point you made there. Oh, sorry, Raymond, go for it.
No. I apologize. I'm old and struggle with buttons.
No.
There has been a series of articles in our kind of our state paper talking about the number of students, families who have requested to be held back for a year in 8th grade, and well over 1,000. I forget the exact number. Was in the article, and I was just wondering if that was a thing in other states and other across the country.
I mean, we've definitely seen that trend probably over the last decade in our area around Philadelphia, where I think young men develop at a different rate, right? So we've constantly talked about that, and is it worth it at the end of their time to take the PG year to grow a little more before entering college? Does it make more sense to do that earlier? I think that 8th grade year, 6th grade, 7th grade year could be, we have a middle school at Malvern, and I've probably witnessed some of that in each of those years over the last decade. But I think it's a trend. I think it'll be challenged in light of the 5-and-5 new recruitment guidelines, right? So, if those rules hold, and that is truly the way we're going, those students who have reclassed, might have unknowingly put themselves into a position where their birth date dictates, their first year of eligibility might be spent their senior year of high school. So, they would have had no way to know that, back when the decision was made, but perhaps someone thinking about that now can weigh that decision a little differently. Student development still should be a part of that, what's right for the kid. I don't know, the strategy to do it to get a better look in sports might be the piece that's harder depending on the student's birth date.
Thank you for that answer. I'm a longtime high school counselor and coach. And to be honest with you, I would pretty much talk every one of my students over the last 52 years out of that, to be honest with you. I'm just not seeing the same future that they're seeing.
Out of reclassing, you mean, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Eighth grade coming into high school. And I was speaking about the article in the Star Ledger or NJ.com, and it indicated, I think, also schools down in your area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely there.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of families delay the start of school as well for their children. So, there's instances where they've delayed the start and then look to reclass. And by the time that, their child is coming out of the system in that sense, it's just, they've got a 2-year advantage at that point in time, just with the athletic decision-making driving the entire development process for that particular child and for that family's entire approach to education. So that's where I really feel like our work as counselors, it's so much more necessary now than ever as it relates to communicating with families in alignment with these athletic pursuits that they have, just because that system is so complex now, and with all the recent rule changes that have been occurring. And to that point as well, Amanda Kristovich of Front Office Sports, she would be an incredible follow for you guys to check out. But Amanda, she just released yesterday that the first judge ruled in favor of athletes recouping their eligibility against this 5-and-5 rule. So that opens up the potential floodgates to then be challenged by every other attorney in the country in terms of being able to point to that judge's order. So it's going to get a lot more. It's going to get a lot more interesting before things settle down in the coming months here. So, but yes, to your point though, Raymond, in terms of just like the bigger picture here, I feel also very strongly that the counselor's voice is one of the last remaining voices at that table in terms of being able to show up without any skin in the game, aside from just wanting to help guide that family and guide that student in their best interest as the total person and not just as the athlete going through the process here. With the monetization that NIL presents, now all of a sudden families have a different view and different relationship when it comes to the potential financial outcomes of that opportunity for sudden income, and that's the thing. So for a lot of these families, revenue sharing won't be there for them. Anything NIL related is going to be self-led and driven through third-party brand partnerships that require work, and it requires deliverables, and it requires time management skills that that excel beyond the scope of a traditional 18, 19-year-old's day-to-day as a collegiate student athlete. So that's something where as an organization, if we can provide the education and the frameworks and the infrastructure for those students to be able to access and be aware of what that all entails, that's going to help raise the tide for them in preparation for those opportunities. But when it comes to revenue sharing, for families to be able to be aware of just the system at play and the resources, and be pointed in the direction that they need to go when those opportunities are presented, so that they aren't taken advantage of and that they do have access to trustworthy individuals that can help guide them through that. I think for that small percentage of families that'll be a reality for it, that'll be invaluable for them as well. But for the most part, I really feel as though driving these conversations with data from our seat as counselors will be the differentiator for this next wave of student athletes, and to be able to utilize this as a workforce development opportunity and a talent development opportunity, to be able to provide these kids with something that comes naturally to them, in the sense that this creator economy is providing all sorts of opportunities that align with their natural skill set as digital natives, but then at the same time connecting those dots for them, as we've always done as counselors, where it aligns with their post-secondary interests and long-term aspirations. But yeah, the age-based eligibility is certainly going to get I think it's going to get messy here in the coming weeks to months in terms of we're going to start seeing a lot more discussions also regarding specific sports as well and the impact that in particular hockey has, as it relates to what that does for college hockey as well. So stay tuned for more.
Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you, Raymond. And thank you everyone for coming today. I understand July 10th is certainly not the most ideal of times to host a webinar. And we're going to have a fast follow next week as well. On Monday, Laura Collins, the athlete psychotherapist, will be leading the discussion at the same time on Monday. And I'll be sending that invite out with a link as well, and in regards to this recording in addition to all of that. So very thankful for you all to join us today, and I'll be getting that out shortly. Ian, thanks again. As always, it's great hearing from you, and really appreciate your insights today.
Thanks for the invite, Jeff, and thanks for everybody for joining.
Thank you.